Good evening, and welcome to Eerie Echoes. Tonight, we descend into the misty peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, lands where every stone holds a story and every shadow hides a secret. These are not just legends, but true fears, lived and told by real witnesses. Turn off the lights, and remember, the mountains never forget, and they never forgive. First, let's walk to a ridgeline where the wind forgets the map. I was traveling a back road in Kentucky, the kind that doesn't appear on tourist maps when the evening fog rolled in. The ridge above me was bare, jagged, and silent, except for the wind, which cut through the trees as though the valley itself was whispering directions I couldn't follow. I had pulled over to stretch my legs, but when I stepped away from the car, the fog swallowed it whole. 5 paces, and the glow of my taillights vanished. The gravel under my boots shifted, crunching in uneven rhythms that made me feel like someone was walking just out of step behind me. The path sloped upward, and I swear the ridge stretched higher than it had on the map. Cliffs loomed where no cliffs should be, and an old wooden fence, half collapsed, ran along the slope. As I traced it with my hand, the wood felt damp, swollen, like it had rained for years without stopping. Halfway up, I found a wooden sign, the letters carved deep but eroded. I brushed the moss away and realized it wasn't English. Not quite. The words twisted into something older, something sharp, and when I spoke them aloud under my breath, the wind stopped. Silence. That was when I heard it. A breath behind my ear. Long, slow, as if someone was leaning close enough for their lips to almost touch my skin. I spun, flashlight shaking, but the beam caught nothing. Only fog, only emptiness. Except the fence line now curved downhill in a direction I hadn't taken. And further down, in the blur, there was a figure. Tall, unmoving, head tilted. I called out, but my own voice came back warped, as though the valley didn't want to let it go. The figure didn't move. Not toward me, not away. Just stood there watching. By the time I scrambled back toward the car, lungs burning, I knew the path wasn't the same one I'd climbed. Branches arched overhead like fingers closing. My boots struck mud, not gravel. My hands scraped stone walls that hadn't been there minutes before. And then suddenly I stumbled onto asphalt. My car sat where I'd left it. Engine cold, taillights dim. But the ridge loomed impossibly high now, crowned with black silhouettes like watchers against the fog. I never went back, and if you ever drive a road without a name, where the map goes blank, keep driving. Don't stop for the ridge. And in the end, the morning came without leaving a single trace. That was it. Now, in another valley, a different light is burning. The trail smelled of pine resin and damp soil, and the evening air pressed heavy against my skin. Locals had warned me not to follow the path past dusk, but I had laughed it off. It was only a trail, after all. Trees, dirt, birds, nothing more. But night in the Appalachians is not the same night you find elsewhere. It falls heavier with no stars, as if the canopy swallows even the sky. My flashlight threw a pale cone ahead, and that was all the world became. Beyond it, blackness, waiting. About 2 miles in, I heard the first whisper, not in my ear but deep inside the trees. A wordless murmur, low, like leaves brushing against each other, except it carried rhythm, intent. I froze, listening, but the forest gave nothing back. I pushed forward, but soon the whisper grew into phrases I couldn't quite understand. It sounded like names, dozens of them. None mine, but each spoken as though the speaker expected me to know. Then came the crunch of footsteps on pine needles. To my left, to my right. I swung the beam, but the light met only trunks, gnarled and slick with moss. No eyes, no faces, just the endless forest. The path turned narrow, bordered by rocks that gleamed as if wet. and carved into the rocks were initials, pairs of letters crossed through, overlapping, some fresh, some old. A memorial or a warning, I couldn't tell. The whispers rose again. This time, one of the names was mine. My blood turned to ice. The sound wasn't ahead. It was behind me. I ran. Branches clawed my arms, the beam of my flashlight flailing. The trail no longer led anywhere. It split, then split again, each turn leading deeper. I could feel the air tighten, thinner, as though I were being funneled. When I finally burst into a clearing, the moon had broken through clouds. There in the center was a tree older than any I had seen. Its bark was carved with every name I had heard whispered. And near the bottom, fresh and wet, was mine. The whisper ended. Silence fell. I dropped the flashlight and stumbled back, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. And even now I wonder, who carved it? And when? Its name is recorded. But the mountain still remembers it better than I do. On the other side of these same mountains, the wind is whispering another name. In the next telling, the water's voice loses the way. Listen. I first heard the drowned mine before I saw it. A steady, gut-deep thrum like a generator buried 50 feet under rock. The path there wasn't much of a path, just a seam of shale that slipped under my boots, a trickle cutting across it, and ferns that brushed my knees as if feeling for a pulse. Locals had told me about the old adit above Clay Fork, where a coal seam vanished into the hillside like a mouth puckered shut. I found the gate chained and sunk crooked into the muck, orange water bleeding from beneath like a wound that wouldn't close. The thrum wasn't mechanical, not quite. It came in long, tidal breaths, the way a sleeping animal fills its lungs and empties them. I clicked on my light and peered through the bars. The beam fell into a tunnel that seemed to bow with the pressure of the mountain. The ceiling was ribbed, timbers soaked dark, nails bent flat, a sagging spine, and everywhere chalk marks, dates, initials, arrows, the word pump circled over and over as though someone had been arguing with the wall. There was a padlock, but it had already known too many winters. I touched it. The ice of the iron went straight through my glove. When I knocked it with a rock, flakes fell like old snow. The chain didn't want to move, but it didn't want to stay either. When it finally gave, the gate didn't swing so much as sigh. I stepped in far enough to smell the mine. If you know, you know. Wet dust, old gas. A sweetness like an apple gone soft. My light skated over a sump where the water lapped at the edge of a plank walkway, and something in that water answered my beam with a tremor. Ripples came, not from my boot, not from the air, but from deeper in the tunnel, as if something had just shifted its weight below the surface. "Hello?" I called, hating the way the sound grabbed at the roof and slid off in damp pieces. There was no answer, but there was tapping, faint, far. A slow, deliberate rhythm on wood or metal, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Not Morse, not a pattern I knew. I told myself it was droplets falling, but droplets don't pause to listen for your breath. On the wall, names, 30, 40, each chalked in a crooked column. Some crossed out with a heavy swipe. Near the bottom, a space, and then today's date. No name, just the date, wet enough to smear if I'd touched it, which I didn't. I tracked the walkway further, deeper into the ribs of the hill, feeling the tiniest lift and fall underfoot as the water rose, settled, rose again. The thrum grew louder. I kept seeing shapes in the reflection that weren't mine. Shoulders turning, a cap brim, a hand, calloused, slick, slide along a rail. I swung the beam, but the water boiled silver and went flat. The tapping moved closer. Behind me now. 3, pause, 3. I turned too fast, heels skidding, toes grappling for purchase. The plank bowed, and cold licked my boot. In that breath, the tunnel leaned, no, the mountain leaned, and the water ran uphill, a thin sheet climbing toward my toes. The chalk on the wall, the fresh date, blurred, then sharpened into a name, my name. Wet, white, undeniable. I stepped backward until the gate framed the night. The chain was on the ground, right where I'd let it fall, but it looked older. Or my eyes did. I don't know. I backed through, pulled the gate, and the sound changed. The thrum fell a note, the tapping retreated, the water lay down like a dog told to stay. The padlock didn't want to go back on. It fought my frozen fingers, fought the loop, then gave up and clicked with a final tiny sound. I stood there listening to the hill breathe and felt the breath inside me try to match it. I didn't let it. I turned the key. A whisper stayed behind me. The map closes, but a door cracks open. Let's keep going. The lake had a name on the topo, but no nickname on the lips of anyone I asked. That should have told me enough. I came at it from a contour line that sloped into scrub oak, then broke into a bowl of cattails, black mud, and a water surface so still it looked like poured glass. The sky above was moonless. Clouds smeared the stars into a milk, but the lake didn't reflect any of it. No sky, no trees, no me, just a flat, depthless dark, like someone had laid a slab of night where water should be. I walked the shoreline and felt the temperature drop. Not wind chill, not the honest cold of altitude. This was the kind of cold that belongs to a cellar. A hush gathered. Even the frogs forgot their lines. When I aimed my light low, the beam hit the surface and stopped dead. No scatter, no shimmer. The light just extinguished. I leaned closer. The smell was wrong. No algae, no green rot, no living thing. The mud at my boots was tacky, but when I prodded the water with a broken reed, it didn't dimple. It accepted the reed without a ripple, as if the surface had no interest in surface behavior. I turned off my light to let my eyes try again. That's when I noticed the other sky, not the one above me, the one below. Far down, where there should have been pebbles and drowned branches, a faint firmament blinked into being. Pinpricks. A thin smear of what might be a Milky Way. But it didn't match the real sky. Stars were in the wrong places, constellations skewed. I knew the shapes well enough to feel the variance, like a tune played half a step off. A breeze came and teased the reeds. Above me, the clouds shifted. Below me, that other sky did not. It didn't care about my weather, it cared about something else. I backed up, heel catching on a root, and my reflection, absent until then, appeared not as a whole, but in pieces. First a shoulder floating in the black, then an arm, then with slow reluctance, a face. My face without eyes. The hollows were there, but they didn't hold light. They held the same star-wrong night as the bottom. I told myself to go. I told myself the bowl of land would make it easy to get turned. But the slope was gentle, the trees distinct. I could leave. I didn't. Across the lake, something like a lantern glowed, a sphere of weakened honey drifting low as if carried by a tired hand. It made no reflection, yet the other sky far below flared in sympathy, brightening where the lantern's twin might be. The light paused, then dipped, as if whoever held it was kneeling. The far canes swayed. I felt a thread pull at the center of me and took a step without meaning to. The mud sighed. My boot sank an inch too far. I pulled free. The lantern faded. The wrong sky steadied. And something, just under the near bank, pressed up against the dark from beneath. Not a fish, not a branch. The broad plane of a hand, flattened as if testing the shape of the lake's skin. It moved left, then right, mapping the shoreline by touch. When it reached the place where my boot had sunk, it stilled. I raised my light and clicked it on. The beam died at the surface, same as before. But for a heartbeat, the lake accepted a pale impression of the beam below, like a ghost of the light sliding through a ghost of water. And I saw my own pale handprint in the knot water under the bank, moving when I moved, not quite in time. I packed up slow. I didn't turn my back. I didn't give it the courtesy. The bowl held its breath until I climbed out and the trees accepted me again. And the morning came without leaving a single trace. Now we'll approach an old structure that waits in the fog. The tower wasn't much to look at by day. A rusted lattice on a knuckle of rock, an equipment shed with a peeling door, a chain-link fence that someone had cut and half-heartedly wired back together. At night, though, the place hummed, like it was gathering its own storm. I was there to check interference, to find out why a county repeater kept picking up voices that weren't on any schedule. I toggled through squelch, checked coax, tightened ground. Good clean work for cold fingers. Close to midnight, the wind died. That's when the voices came, not the dispatcher, not local chatter. This was a single voice, male, low, talking like he'd been on the road too long, and learned to aim his words so they didn't spill. He said my childhood nickname, one I hadn't heard since the summer my aunt lived by the river, and asked me if the old dog still slept on the porch. I hadn't told any of the crew about that dog. The dog had been Bones since I was 15. Identify, I said, trying too hard to make it sound routine. Unit and location. He answered with weather. Not the weather outside my hood, but weather from another night. Fog on 23, icy shoulders, a blinker stuck on in the dark. He described where a brick church used to be before it burned. Then he gave directions to a turn I hadn't taken in 15 years. Second left after the tar snake that looks like a finger, slow over the cattle guard because somebody welded a lip on one side. I looked at the generator panel. The switch was still off. The tower LEDs were dead. Nothing should have been alive enough to move a whisper, much less a sentence. Say again, I said, as if repetition would make the world behave. Static breathed. The voice continued, a little closer now, the timbre filling out like a face stepping into a porch light. He told me to climb. The top would hear better. I didn't argue with the habit in my muscles. I clipped on and started up, boots finding rungs, hands remembering how to belong to steel. Halfway, the air changed, the kind of pressure drop that makes your ears think of thunder. The forest below flattened. The shed roof gleamed like a dull blade. I stopped to rest and listened. Another voice spoke under the first. A woman, bright but exhausted, saying a list of numbers that made no sense. 11 pairs, then a long string, then a pause, then the name of a road that doesn't exist anymore. I could hear breath over the mic. I could hear her trying not to let the breath be heard. At the top, the platform swayed. I should have been above the sound, but the sound was above me. A hiss circled like a whisper running a catwalk just out of reach. I knelt by the antenna and checked connections I'd already checked. My glove brushed a bit of knife-scratched text in the paint. Keep off this air, and under it, a date. Older than me. Tell me your name, I said. The wind answered with nothing. The male voice said my nickname again, then the dog's, then described the sound of my Aunt OS screen door when it shut, the little metal rattle after the slam. He told me it never really stops. You hear it once, it keeps talking in your ear for years, softer and softer until you don't remember the words, only the shape of them. The woman read the numbers again. I wrote them on my palm, my marker freezing and skipping. When I compared the rows, the pairs didn't match, but the long string did. It matched the date scratched into the paint, down to the hour. I climbed down fast without looking hurried. At the fence, the cut wires touched and sparked, just a tick, a kiss, not from power, but from air getting thin and deciding to bite. I closed the gate anyway. On the ride out, the repeater stayed quiet. When I checked the recording later, there was nothing but my own voice, thin and professional, asking for identification no one gave. Its name is recorded, but the mountain still remembers it better than I do. A ghost's work isn't finished, but our road turns. Listen. They said the school wasn't haunted so much as tired. Boards that had spent too many winters swell and shrink on their own. Box stoves ping and sing when they cool. Chalk dust goes everywhere. I told myself all of that as I let myself in with the key the county clerk kept in a ceramic hen on her desk. The bell rope still hung in the vestibule, frayed where small hands had worried at it for decades. I pulled it lightly and felt weight. A bell still up there, patient, waiting for someone to remember its voice. Inside, 2 long rows of desks, scarred with penknives and compass points, windows blind with grime, alphabet cards above the blackboard gone to a brown stiffness. I set my lantern on the teacher's desk and wiped a square on the slate. The room was built to collect sound and make children behave with it. Even my breath had corners. I paced to keep my warmth. My step echoed under me, hollow. The basement space ran the length of the building, brick-walled and cool, with a coal bin at one end. I didn't want to go down there. I wanted to stand in the safe, honest ruin of the classroom and pretend every sound was structural. Something slid. A desk, 2 rows back, shifted an inch and clicked. Wood against wood. I turned slowly. The floorboards were old enough to telegraph every mood change. I would have blamed settling if the second desk hadn't shifted too, aligning itself with the first the way soldiers make room down a bench. "Okay," I said softly, the way you talk to a stray. "Okay." Chalk rolled across the tray and stopped at the center. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't seen it move. The stick was short, blue paper still clinging to one end. I picked it up. It felt like picking up a dry bone. I wrote the date. The line came out wavering, but the numbers stood fine. Below it, without my hand, letters formed. Not graceful, children never are when they begin, but confident, present. Then a list of names, the chalk clicking between each like quiet applause. Footsteps sounded in the vestibule. Not boots, not heels. Soft shoes, the kind rubber erasers used to leave halos with. The bell rope tugged once, just enough to make a whisper hum inside the walls. I went to the door and opened it. The hall was empty, but the smell of wet wool had arrived. Outside the windows, night pressed up against the glass, a handful of snow starting its slow, indecisive fall. When I looked back at the board, the list had lengthened. A name I knew from a cemetery stone on the ridge. Another I'd seen clotted in ink in a town ledger after the fever came. At the bottom, space waited. I didn't raise the chalk. I wasn't going to give the room the satisfaction. Desks scraped again. The 2 rows squared up, knees to knees with the teacher's stand. I could feel the room find its posture. A thin draft slid along the floor, circling my ankles. The basement door eased open and breathed up cold. I thought of the coal bin, the shovel leaning, the prints you could find in a bin where a kid had laughed and climbed. I closed the door with my heel and set the latch. It felt like pressing a finger to a pulse. I rang the bell once because it deserved it. The note went up into the rafters and came down softer. The desks didn't move again. The board kept its names. The sound died, but the road is still there. We both know it. Another valley shows a different light. We go where it glows. The cabin had more nails than boards. That's how it looked anyway. Every window trimmed in iron like a mouth clamped shut. Whoever did the job believed in overkill. Nails doubled, tripled, like someone expected the glass to want out. I found it by accident on a deer path that didn't know it was a path anymore. The chimney was stout, the porch slumped, the door swollen in its frame like a tongue bitten once and never quite healed. I didn't plan to go in. I planned to appreciate a ruin and walk on. But the door unlatched when I tugged, and the smell that came out wasn't rot. It was cedar and old smoke and something like borrowed breath. The kind houses take when they remember themselves. Inside, the windows were hammered shut from the outside. Heads of nails bloomed like iron mushrooms, rings of rust staining boards where rain had tried to get in and failed. A cot slouched along one wall, its rope webbed with dust that draped like moth wings. A hunter's hooks jutted above it, 2 of them bent wrong, as if whatever they'd held hadn't wanted to be held anymore. I put my glove on the nearest window board and felt cold, not air cold, iron cold. I tapped the head of a nail. It rang dull. The next one rang softer. The third rang like a thing with a job to do. When I turned, the cot had changed its angle. Only a little. Only enough that I could tell. The dust on the floor didn't lie about that sort of thing. I stood still enough to hear the sound a house makes when it braces. I asked the empty what it wanted, and a board somewhere replied with a wet pop, the kind you hear when a knot gives up. Then came the first window. The lowest nail turned. Not out. In. As if the board itself had been waiting for its chance to inhale. Another nail followed with a slow twist that made the head wobble, loosen, and lean. The board trembled. Its neighbors held. The glass behind it, if there was glass, didn't show. Only darkness, as tight and smooth as the blank of a lake at night. I whispered, "Don't," to nobody anyone can see. The nail stopped moving. The cot straightened back. A draft slipped under the door, tasting the room left to right, then gone. I should have left. Instead, I crossed to the far corner where a stack of newspaper lay folded into a shape that had used to be a chair. The top page told of a season when the deer were thin and the state was fat with ideas. The date sat near the masthead, polite and completely wrong for the nails I could see, the hammer marks on the boards, the slope of the light. I put the paper back exactly as I'd found it. When I turned, 3 nails on the center window had backed out a half-inch, heads proud like eyes. Frost limned their rings. On the cot, something had sat. The dust had a clean oval in it, a weight without a body. I backed to the door with my hands out, palms open to show the air I wasn't holding anything back. The latch didn't want to find its pocket. It found it anyway, with a sound like a breath sliding into a familiar throat. Outside, in the bare yard, snow had started. My tracks looked like anyone's. A second set came across them at a diagonal, light as a fox's, but with the wrong geometry. Heel where toe should be, toe where heel should be, and no depth at all where there should have been weight. And the morning came without leaving a single trace. At this hour of night, a mail route still runs. Onward. I took the shift because nobody else wanted it. Mountain road, bad shoulders, tight turnarounds, mailboxes that leaned like old men. The regular carrier had been on the route since before I had knuckles, and he had a way with people I never learned. Half preacher, half mechanic, all patience. He died in his sleep 2 winters ago. That didn't stop the mail. The first time I heard the rattle of an engine that wasn't mine, I'd pulled into a pull-off to sip from my thermos and count the waypoints that always lied about how far you'd gone. The sound came up the hollow slow like a vehicle with an honest, tired carb. I waited for headlights to smear the pines, but the road stayed dark. Only the sound past me chugged and settled down near the next cluster of boxes. I followed at a crawl. The turn put me in sight of 6 boxes nailed to a beam. 5 sagged. 1 stood military straight, its flag trembling to attention. There was a bag on the post, a blue canvas with a tie strap, and it sagged like it had weight to it. I didn't leave the bag. I hadn't filled it. I braked and set my flashers to warn nobody of nothing. In the hazard strobe, snow looked like it couldn't decide whether to fall or hover. The bag's tie had been knotted the way the old carrier tied his, a slip I never got right. I touched it, and the knot came free as if it had been waiting to be understood. Inside, letters addressed to people who'd moved away in high school, bills for a phone company that folded before the millennium, a birthday card for a girl who'd be 50 now. The stamps were canceled, but not in any way I recognized. A circle, a date, a town that had changed its spelling to be easier for outsiders and never quite forgave itself. I placed the first letter in the straight-backed box. The flag clicked up on its own. Metal said yes. When I stepped back, the snow near my boots unmarked itself, smoothing from 2 ovals back to nothing in a slow, satisfied shrug. The engine sound returned, this time coming down the line from the far bend. It passed me with the weight of a thing working, a job not finished yet. a habit that had sunk into the ruts and liked the way they told it where to go. I stood aside and let the sound pull a draft of cold after it. On the beam, the cold left a sheen. Ice skinned the wood in an instant. A set of prints crossed it as if from a boot that wasn't cold at all. The leather, if that's what it was, left an impression that rose like steam and then faded. I finished the cluster, flags up on each like little red tongues testing the weather. When I got back in the truck, the thermos had cooled more than physics should allow. The seat beside me held a ring of melted snow in the shape of a hat set down and lifted. Halfway to the ridge, I caught up with the sound again. It paused where the road slumped into clay and waited. I couldn't see it. I felt it, the way you feel a truck idling behind a wall. I set my own tires in the places that looked honest and went by. The mirror showed me a patch of moving dark that might have been tail lights, if tail lights could decide to go around curves with a patience I'll never have. At the last house, a porch light gave me the nod. A man now, opened the door and took a letter with those careful, two-handed fingers you use when the paper matters more than you expected. "Didn't think that'd ever come," he said. He didn't ask how I'd gotten it. Some things don't benefit from questions. Its name is recorded. But the mountain still remembers it better than I do. Now the river runs under iron. Keep listening. The iron bridge had two moods. Summer, when the steel sang as heat walked across it, and winter, when it held itself like a hurt animal and let your boots know it. I crossed it often enough to have a way. Hand on the right rail, eyes on the far post with the bolt shaved smooth by bored boys, wait even. That night, the river below sounded like a siren pitched to lull rather than warn. Ice bells rang under the current, and mist braided itself around the trusses. My first step made the expected groan. My second step made a second groan. My third step made two. One for me, one not for me. I paused. The night paused back. Then the extra step came again. A half beat off, as if the bridge were teaching a child to walk. I told myself the metal echoed. It does. I know that. But the echo doesn't keep its own time when you change yours. I took 3 fast steps. The bridge answered with 3 and 3 more. The second set lighter, as if they belonged to a person with less mass or more years. I turned without turning. Chin tipped, eyes angling, the body realizing you can't catch a shadow with direct looking. The far end of the bridge framed night. The near end framed night. No figure on steel. But every rivet around me seemed to have learned how to breathe. I tested it. I shifted my weight to the inside of my feet, threw a little hop, then landed heel first near the splice plate that clacks. My step made its usual clack. The not-me step landed toe first, silent, and then clacked late, imitating my mistake and not getting it right. "Okay," I said to the truss. "Okay." I took a coin from my pocket, a dime thin enough to notice the cold. I flicked it ahead. It nicked a flange and spun on the deck, singing that small silver song. It spun longer than it should have. It slid forward an inch without help. Then another inch, as if courted by a magnet. It stopped at a bolt head and lay flat. When I passed it, it wasn't there. The bolt head held frost in the shape of a dime. The steps came again. When I sped up, they tried. When I slowed, they slowed too late. At the midpoint, the part where every bridge learns if it's going to bear you or tell you to go, my breath fogged and hung, then drifted down. Something like breath rose from the deck to meet it, and both vanished where they touched. I remembered a story about a man who fell when a load shifted on a truck, remembered until the remembering became the only thing he knew how to do. They didn't fish him out. The river kept him. And there's the weight of a man, and there's the weight of a memory, and they are not the same. But the bridge feels both. I walked the rest without games. The steps stayed with me, never daring to pass, never willing to stay behind. At the end, my boots hit dirt. The second steps ended with a sound like hands on the rail, light, grateful. Done for now. The sound died, but the road is still there. We both know it. Before the ashes cool, another fire burns. Let's reach it. The barn leaned as if listening. The slope of the roof made a sentence out of the hill. Boards drifted wide, then tight again where someone had decided to save what could be saved. The door rolled back on a track that talked in a voice like an old tenor, sweet if a little torn. I stepped into heat. There shouldn't have been heat. Snow lay in stiff drifts, the kind with a crust that cracks like ceramic. The sky had that pale, gutless color that means noon without warmth. But the barn, center bay, where a pit had been dug a long time ago for reasons nobody wrote down, breathed warmth up my kneecaps. A steady flush like the last breath of a kiln after the pots are pulled and the door stones go back in crooked. The floor held an ash that wasn't exactly ash. It was too fine, too uniform, a powder that remembered being wood and remembered more than that. My boot print didn't dent it. It filled itself back with a patient ease the second I lifted my weight. Embers didn't glow, they suggested. The color wasn't tea red, but the idea of red. A lingering promise left after the light leaves. Hooks hung where harness had once slept. A swallow's nest clung to a beam in the wrong season, dry and eloquent. Someone had painted a mark on the end of the manger post. A brand, a circle crossed by a line. I knew it from a photograph in a book about a family that never left, and also never stayed. The brand had belonged to a great-grandfather who burned with a tidy fury and made no friends he could not later apologize to. I reached a hand toward the ash. Heat lifted my skin until I could feel my palm begin to argue with itself. When I brought my hand away, the warmth followed. No, it leaned after me, wanting to stay in touch. In the powder, a shallow groove traced the motion my hand had made in air. I hadn't touched it. It had noticed me anyway. The smell was not smoke. It was the coat a fire takes off and leaves draped over a chair, sweat, sap, iron, a rumor of resin. I stood very still and listened past my own pulse. In the rafters, something ticked where heat met cold. In the walls, something settled that had been ready to go a long time and never did. A draft curled through a gap and kissed the ash. A line formed, delicate as a child's first letter. Then another. Then four, in the shape of steps. Heel, toe, walking across the pit toward the far door with a confidence that was not aimed at me at all. The steps paused at the sill. The jamb darkened at shoulder height, the kind of print made by generations of hands. No hand was there now. The wood bulged as if proud of its memory. I pulled the door the rest of the way. Outside, the drift had hardened to something between snow and stone. No track crossed it. I looked back to the pit. The ash smoothed itself clean, as if a towel had been pulled across a brow and hidden away. I rolled the door shut. The tenor in the track sang a softer note for me on the way out. I turned the key. A whisper stayed behind me. The water will confuse the road again soon. For now, follow the breath you can trust. The broadcasting is over for tonight. 10 valleys, 10 different shadows. In Appalachia, fear never ends. It only changes its place. If you made it through this far, keep your light on, keep your doors checked, and if you want more, you know where to find it next time. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments which path we should take in the next telling. Keep your lights on and never lose your way.